So thank you all for coming out this morning. Now, just for a second, I want everyone to quickly stand up. This will only take half a second. I know everyone, we're now at day 3. You were filled with amazing information. I need to fill in a little bit more information, a little bit of fun. So just kind of shake in place and bounce, get that information to settle out, make a little bit of room on top for this. Okay, you're good to go. Now, for any of the future sessions, stand up while if you're hearing something, stand up and start doing this. And say, I'm making more room for what you're saying. And at least it'll confuse the other speakers. Okay, so we've got kind of a shorter time frame here, so I'm going to push through, but I want you to interrupt me if there's questions, if you've got comments, and then we'll have some time at the end for discussion as well. First, the standard disclaimers. These are tricks and tips that I've learned throughout my career, but anytime you're taking career advice, I'd recommend you get a coach or a mentor to help personalize it for you. These are my personal views and do not represent any company I am currently working for or may have worked for in the past, so I am 100% liable for anything you see here. And with all my presentations, absolutely no animals were harmed in the creation, but I do hope you will support your local rescue groups. I have to give credit to Rylan Layton. He's a co-worker and fellow presenter. He and I were asked by UPS to pull together a presentation on not Agile as a methodology, but business agility and potentially how they would transform for Agile. So we put together a 2-hour presentation for their project management program management team. And as a result of that, I actually created this as a spin-off presentation. So full credit to Rylan for helping create the concept and work out some of the content. He has a book out, Agile Business Analysts, that's available on Amazon and his website. And so this presentation is downloadable through the conference and on my website, EckmanGuides.com. So grab it and then you can link to his information. I also say that because I also notice people take lots of pictures, which is great if you want to tweet it out. My contact information is not showing at the bottom of the screen, so it's just at Hans Eckman. And if you need this material, just download it later rather than worrying about writing everything down. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? First, we need to understand what we're talking about when we talk about agility, or specifically business agility. We're not going to, as I said, address Agile as a methodology or IT methodology per se, but there's principles from Agile that we're going to talk about in general. We're going to take a look at kind of the risk-value cycles and why being more agile, using more innovations is valuable. We're going to look at the Cynefin Framework as a way of selecting whether or not an iterative approach, a more agile approach, is good for your organization and when it should be applied. There's a lot of frameworks out there, but that one is one that I'm enjoying at the moment. And then we're going to talk about how culture and leadership really are going to play a role into business agility. So, questions before we jump right in? All right, so first, what do we mean by agility? If we ask agility, what are we talking about? What comes to mind when we think about just agility in general? Flexibility, responsive, adaptation, nimble, change, fast. Okay, excellent. So, an easy way, if you're dealing with complex concepts, although agility maybe isn't the most complex in the world, is to look at analogies. So when we look at sports, when you think about athletes, their whole focus is being able to respond to change fast and effective. Being able to respond to change but always picking the wrong thing and doing poorly doesn't get you very far. It's still nimble, it's just not effective. We want to be nimble and effective. But the flip side of that, it's easy to think about how we can react to change, react to opportunities more often. But when you think about dog training, and I'm a big fan of dog agility courses, I think they're amazing to watch. With the dog knows the tricks. They know what to do. But they don't necessarily know the order, they don't know the number of repetitions, they don't know the pattern, they just know how to do individual tasks. So this is also like our operating teams. Our operating teams have procedures, they have things that they know how to do, but do they always know what order to do them in? Do they always know what's most important? So think about this when we're talking about our operating teams, that follows more of a dog agility where you've got a set of processes, people, tools, but how you sequence and how you prioritize them will affect your agility. So when we apply that to business, I'm just going to really simplify things here today. We're talking about two areas. How can I deliver value quickly, and how can I respond quickly to change? Like, there's a lot of different areas, but if you can just simplify it and just do two things right, these are the most important concepts in agility that you can do with your team and with your company. And everything's going to revolve around this area. So, who's really doing a great job with this? And specifically, these companies have implemented DevOps and have very agile, very nimble processes. Amazon, when they switched over to web services, they are actually deploying code every 11.7 seconds to production. Now, does that mean every project team, every group is deploying code every 11 seconds? Absolutely not. But across all their areas, they have the ability to push code, push tests, push marketing, push products out, and deploy those on the fly to small markets, to everybody, and they've created this system where they can constantly test, innovate, evolve, and measure. So their whole culture is about pushing stuff out fast to see what works. Netflix, they found that the most important aspect of their service and their membership satisfaction wasn't content, wasn't original content, wasn't what movies they have, it was quality of streaming. Because there's more content than we could ever watch on Netflix. But when we get that little spinning dial, we get ticked off. So, one of the things they did was they built what they called the Simian Army. A whole set of bots and automated programs that constantly and proactively test their network, look for bandwidth issues, look for stability, constantly remeasure and rebalance content. Many people don't know that Netflix actually pays to put servers in your ISP's local data center, hosting the most common content so that they don't have to run it across the whole network. And they don't have to pay Amazon's hosting fees for AWS, because Netflix runs on AWS. All they have to do is stream that locally to your area. So when the latest season of Daredevil pops out, immediately for the spike, that gets deployed to all the major cities so that it can be hosted locally. They have had a massive drop in downtime, complaints, service issues across the board because they're now proactively looking for problems and solving them before anyone notices. So two amazing companies. The links at the bottom from TechBeacon, 10 companies that are killing it in DevOps. So there's 8 other great stories to go along with that one. All right, so first thing, how do we deliver value quickly? Before we do that, we got to decide what are we talking about when we talk about value, because value is one of those very subjective things. So again, I like to simplify things to no more than 3 concepts if possible, 2 or 1 whenever you can, because then it gives you something to focus on. So number 1, customer value. And when we talk about customer value, it's really 2 areas: increasing the value of goods or services that they're receiving, or reducing the transactional risk. So in the first one, think about the lawn bags. We don't buy things based on price. You would not buy the cheapest bag if every time you filled it, it tore and you had to start over. But you're also not going to spend $15 a bag because it's just not needed. You're going to find the most affordable bag that actually gets the job done. So we always make our decisions based on value. The second is transactional risk. Every time I make a purchase, every time I engage a service, I have money at stake, I have time at stake. So if I can reduce the risk of those transactions, then I can provide more value. A couple of quick examples on that. Walmart discovered that for a small item, $10 is the threshold where people will contemplate the decision or often not make it, or will try and competitively price something. If it can come in under $10, people will buy it without thinking. Have you ever noticed that all music CDs and movies are typically $8.88 or less at Walmart? Their sales quadrupled when they switched to that pricing model. Online, I don't know what the current value is, but it seems to be holding usually around $50. Any purchase $50 or more has perceived transactional risk, the hassle of return, but if it's less than $50, chances are we're just going to buy it. And we may even have multiple tiers. Like, I'm a sucker for Amazon's lightning deals, and I see something for under $10, and I'm like, it's only $10. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? I just have now 482 flashlights. Literally. Well, we also have to consider employee value. Because when we're dividing value, often we can't just look at our customers and the people who are paying our bills. If our employees aren't happy, if they aren't satisfied, they're not going to be delivering the best service. So employee value, one, we got to improve satisfaction. Do people enjoy doing their job? Are we giving them the right support? How many people here have had at least one instance in the last 5 years of their career where they were so frustrated with something stupid that happened at their organization, they were tempted to walk out? Anyone who did not have something? If so, I need to know what company and what division you work in. Because you should be number one on the employee satisfaction rating. The second is, can you reduce errors? Well, why does that matter? Does anyone here not take pride in the work they do? Can you think of many people, I mean maybe there's a few, that don't actually want to do a good job when they come to work? Everyone generally wants to do a good job. Maybe they're frustrated, maybe it's hard, maybe there's challenges. If you can reduce the errors that they have to fix, the fires that you and your team have to fight, it will also improve satisfaction and the quality of work. And finally, we need to increase throughput. Throughput, the faster we can move things through the chain, the less we can have work in progress, and the faster we can deliver things, the more value we're delivering. Now, there's one more category of value I'm going to throw up here. Anyone want to hazard a guess what that's going to be? What other area or giant grouping could we do? We've covered our customers, we've covered our company. Who else is absolutely tied to our business's success? Stakeholders are, but they're part of our company. So they'd be part of employee value.
Suppliers.
Suppliers, thank you. Suppliers, partners, vendors. Think about all the companies that make our businesses work. We no longer are isolated businesses. When I had a general store, I still would have to bring in goods and services from other groups. I still have utilities. I still have real estate. There's all these companies we deal with. So for them, it's increasing the value of goods or services. And it's the exchange that you're dealing with value. If you're buying from them, it's ensuring that you're getting the most value. If you're providing value to them, the same way. And the last is, we've got to decrease the transactional cost and risk. Because every time we do business, every transaction has both cost and risk. The lower we can make both of those numbers, the better the relationship, the stronger the relationship, and the more value we're going to drive. Questions or thoughts on risk?
So the customer and the partner vendor
Yes.
are pretty parallel there.
Yes.
How would you characterize the difference?
I would say the big difference is when you're talking about a partner or vendor, you're looking probably more at the cost of doing business and reducing the transactional cost, whereas with a customer, it's always one way. You could call it two ways with you return, but I don't because the customer's not really selling anything to you. It's also, I'd say, a mental concept. Our partners and vendors, if we view them as in business with us, we will form a mutually beneficial relationship, not an adversarial relationship. An example with that, a very large retail store that might be very orange in color, when they were top of the market, absolutely set the terms and abuse their vendors across the board. I hate shopping there because I did a one-year project that almost killed me. It's the only job where multiple times during the day I had to force myself not to walk out. Like, drop everything, walk out, quit my company, quit the relationship, quit everything. It was awful. Now, I learned a lot from that, and in retrospect, it's a great experience. I will never, ever work for them again. It was bad. They did not, at that time, have a partnership relationship, whereas other companies have really worked well. Costco, perfect example. Costco works with all of their suppliers. When they place an order, they work with the company to make sure that they're successful. They help them drive down their costs. They help them with product selection. They help them with sourcing and shipping and all these areas, because if their suppliers aren't successful, they can't keep the low competitive prices for the highest quality of goods. Another footnote there, when you talk about knowing your market, the average income of a Sam's Club member is, was about, I don't know currently, but it was around $48,000. Costco, the average family income of members is $120,000. Two completely different core market groups. All right, so how do we build a minimum viable product? Because when we talk about value, we're talking about MVP is always going to come up. Who wants to take a shot at explaining to the group what an MVP is?
Build, measure, learn, justify.
Okay, so build, measure, learn, justify. Okay, so that's how you create one. Good start. Yes?
It's the minimum product that you can put on the market that is going to generate some sales.
Okay, so it could be the minimum product that could be sold. What's the minimum thing we can take to market that somebody will buy? Does an MVP have to go to market?
No.
Okay, so what's another MVP?
The minimum value delivered.
Minimum value, tell me more, because we got the first two words of the thing, we're missing product.
To the customer, whatever moves them forward.
Okay, but so it might not be something that's sold, but it has to be something that can be implemented and used. Is that always the case? So we've already said it's not always that you have to sell it. Now we say it has to be usable by somebody, so it has to be deployed, basically something that we put into production or put into use. Are there times where an MVP isn't going to be used by an operating team?
It could be a proof of concept so that you can learn from it and know what your next steps are going to be.
Absolutely. So an MVP could be some sort of a product that says, hey, we're just going to see whether or not this has value. We're going to do this as a learning product, but we may not actually use and implement. So now you see why people get so confused with MVP and MVP in our organization, because it has different definitions, it has different connotations. So again, simplify the message so that teams will understand. Think about building a car. If we were trying to build a car, we know we have to have wheels. The wheels have to have a chassis to hold them. We need to have some sort of frame or body around it. And by the time the first minimum viable product we get is the car, we've already built out the car, we've already invested all that time into something, and we really don't know if anyone will want it or if it'll work. What if we redefine what the problem is, what the value statement is? What if this is a transportation issue? The reason we have cars is to move people and stuff faster. Well, what are other ways we can move people or stuff? Maybe my first proof of concept or my first test is a skateboard. Maybe I then take the skateboard after I've learned from it and I make a scooter. And what if I take my scooter and then make a bicycle? And I take my bicycle and I make a motorcycle, and then I take my motorcycle and I have a car. At the end of the process, even if it takes me the same duration, that car using the MVP is going to be far better. The reason is we've had all of these test loops, all these times to learn more about what it is people want to do, what delivers value, and how it's going to work. So instead, this was a concept we introduced at a bank I worked for as part of our innovation team. And we knew it had really taken hold because we would be in these great planning meetings and someone would say, wait a minute. I think you're talking about the car. Let's get back to what the skateboard is. Because we could only deliver a skateboard this year. What's the skateboard? And that's when we knew this took up. So the PowerPoint version of this and some of those other slides are available under my innovation presentation as PowerPoint that you can download right away. So feel free to take this slide and use it. Yes?
How would you relate that to digital solution?
How do we relate it to digital?
Or what's the skateboard of an application?
So what's a skateboard in a digital application? It's context-based. So this plan is, what are my intermediate steps to get to what I think my ultimate goal is? So skateboards could be which platform, which technology, which approach, which interface. Let's put something out, let's put a wireframe, let's just do something that people can click and react to and see what happens. It could be a performance proof of concept. So it could be, hey, we're going to now create a mobile version or a digital version of linking in these systems. Let's try several different paths and see which one works. It could be a minimal viable consumer product. So you could push something out. I don't have the slide here. It's in the innovation deck. Think about Apple. Apple's first really big bang product in the mobile digital space was the iPod. Were there other music players available when the iPod came out? Absolutely. The market had been proven. They just built one that was simpler or easier. Then think about as they added video and as the device format changed. And then we had the iPhone and the tablet. Each one of those is the road to the car. So each one was a different version creating a new product in a new product space. Scott?
Do you think their vision was good enough that they saw the current, something current as an end state when they were designing the iPod?
Absolutely. That's one of the things. So Steve Jobs is credited as an innovator. He never created anything new. He took a look at a market space that had a consumer need that could be made a lot easier and a lot prettier. So he exploited where there was a need that wasn't being served, and he absolutely did a brilliant job of creating what's the simplest version to deliver to that market, to that audience. Look at the Newton. The Newton was a disaster. Why? Because the market hadn't been proven. When the iPhone and the tablet came out, those markets had been pretty well solidified. They just found a better way of doing it. And now everyone who's in the cult of Apple will always stay in the cult of Apple because it just makes sense. It's easier to stay than it is to go, so it creates a natural barrier to exit. Absolutely great question. Okay, so let's take a look at specifically about value. So, for every amount of effort, dollars, resources we put towards something, ideally we should be getting a certain amount of value back. So, it could be one-to-one. For every hour of work I put in, I'm getting an hour of value out. Now, we all know that's not true because we have email, and that just wastes our lives. But imagine we've got an ideal dotted line that says, if I could create a rate at which I pour money into the system, and it pours out value, the steeper the line, the more profitable, the better I am. The slower the line, then the slower. But ideally, I could have a linear line between value and work effort if things work out. So that's our ideal target state. This is the maximum possible value I can get for my effort. When we look at a waterfall or one-and-done approach, I've got all of this effort, all of this effort, all of this effort, and I'm not anywhere close to delivering value. Then I finally get something that I can start testing and using and learning from. And I start getting some knowledge value from that. And then finally I go to the point where I implement and I've got my car. But until I implement, I don't have anything that's delivered that end user value. So that's one of the problems. This is why our teams get so frustrated. They see all this work and then they don't get to see the car until the very, very end. That can be very frustrating. What if we, and the pattern for this stays the same, what if we just simply broke it down into smaller steps? So this is the key to Agile and iterative, and this has been around far longer than Agile as a methodology has been. If I can take that same loop where I'm putting in effort and then getting some results, I can break that loop down, and every time I do a release, every time I create an MVP, every time I have something to react to, I am now making it back to the value line. So, the difference in space between the red line and the blue line is all the value you have gained, and gained earlier hitting that ideal line. And that's where our MVPs come in. My first delivery is a skateboard. My second one is the scooter. And then I get to that same great car at the end. Even if I get there, look at how much more value I've delivered throughout the life cycle. And maybe those other MVPs are still usable products. Maybe they're throwaway. I don't know. It could be both. If you think about this as a transportation, all of those could be products in our product line eventually building to a car. And if you look at a lot of companies that had a core base and have now added and expanded what they're building and selling, you're seeing that same model where they're building on their customer base and putting out and delivering to new industries. So again, the closer we can come to that value line by breaking it into cycles. Now, could we break it into infinitely small cycles? Not really, because there's always going to be some sort of effort, testing, and deployment. That has overhead, so we would lose out and we'd end up coming up with an almost flat, like 90-degree line, and that doesn't help us. But what about risk? So we have the same problem with risk. If we look at the risk over time during our delivery cycle, the longer I go along, I'm building up all of this risk, all of this risk, all of this risk. But until I have something to react to, until I have something to test, I can't start dissipating that risk very much. So at the end of the project, when I get towards delivery and testing and validation, when I have something to react to, then I dramatically start driving down that risk to build to the car. But I don't get my risk back down to zero until I deploy. So we can take the same cycle and do the same thing, simply by just shortening and doing this in iterations, doing this in phases, doing this in sprints, whatever you want to call it. By breaking this into the same pattern but doing it smaller, look at the difference between the two lines. That's all the risk we have removed from the organization. This is where project managers' heads explode. Because this isn't a list of risks and issues. This isn't constraints. This isn't challenges that the team's going to have to overcome that they can manage on their progress report and review weekly with stakeholders. This is simply doing the same thing but breaking it into smaller cycles. We automatically reduce risk by this amount. And again, the risk delivery is tied to our MVP. So the combination of these two models, delivering value at each point where we touch the minimum value line, or maximum value line, and every time we touch the bottom where we've eliminated our risk or nearly eliminated our risk, like it's never going to be zero, but we will perceive it as the lowest reasonable risk we can endure. We're again saving the organization that much risk. Thoughts or questions on taking why the iterative approach works, regardless of how you do it? Yes?
I guess if I was a consumer and I'm buying something that's non-tangible,
Yes.
and I'm looking at purchasing the car, but I get the skateboard,
Yeah.
isn't there a higher risk if I buy the skateboard and they have to do a file fix, per se, to get me to that place where I really want to be? Isn't there a risk there as well?
So your early adopters are, by nature, accepting more risk to get your product or service. They expect more disruption. Other non-Apple people, how many people always pre-buy the latest, or when they buy a phone, they pre-buy it so that they can get it on release day? How many people wait 1 to 2 months until they've released the first patch to fix all the things that didn't quite work? There you go. So, the skateboard, it's a skateboard either way. What time and the perceived risk is something that you'd have to mitigate with the customer. Or, if the customer's getting the bicycle and your skateboard and scooter was an internal use, Microsoft finally realized that people were tired of all their bugs. So now all their software has to be run internally for at least 1 year by teams before they'll release it to the public. It delays it, but now we don't hate them as much. So great. Okay, so why do we deliver in smaller increments? A couple of highlights. First, we're reducing missed requirements and false assumptions. We're having an earlier chance to validate, to see it, to look at it, and to react to it. Because we know that our business stakeholders, no matter what they were promised while they were golfing or dinnering with our vendors, that what they asked for isn't what they really need, and what they're telling us to do isn't really going to work. So the sooner we can decouple that and start getting them back to reality, the better. None of our businesses are stagnant. So we're going to have needs, changes, things are going to come up. If we take an iterative approach, it's a lot easier. We can get those changes in faster and more efficiently. And then next is the feedback. The sooner I get feedback, the sooner I can adjust my plan. How do we manage risk? The biggest thing is we're just reducing accumulated risk. Even if we do exactly what we're doing, but we just break it down into smaller deliveries, we are reducing the accumulated risk that is built into the system. We're also preserving unspent capital, because through every cycle, I haven't gone so far down the road that I'm now stuck. My big stuck waterfall moment was I decided I wanted to refurbish an old 1985 Bronco. And then I hit the point where I had so much money in it, I couldn't decide, do I now keep putting more money in it, or do I take it as a loss? That was my waterfall moment. I did both. I kept putting more money in it, and then took it as a massive loss, and have never bought a used car since. Big, big mistake. If I'd broken it into smaller increments and known what I was doing, I could have cut my losses a lot earlier. And then we're accelerating value. So we're getting learned lessons, and we're discovering constraints faster. We're delivering product and accumulating companies, we're getting compounded interest because we've got something that's generating value. It's now generating value earlier in our cycles, so we're getting a benefit from that. And then one of the biggest things is with our stakeholders, we're giving them quick wins. We're giving them something that they can celebrate, hero stories that our team can do. We're building confidence and trust. And that's the big thing. A lot of people believe, well, if I don't get everything all at once, it's not going to work. You're getting everything, but you're going to prioritize what you want the most throughout this whole process. So not only are you getting what you want ultimately, you're getting what you want right now. And getting them to shift and focus on that is extremely helpful. All right, but how do we become business agile? How do we take these principles and change the way we look at our businesses and operate? So the first thing is, there's a few work practices that we need to change. Number one, we need to only work on things that deliver value. Not completely practical, because there are keep the lights on activities that we have to do. But when you're looking at what you're going to do the next day you go into the office, is it adding value? If not, it's fun but useless. Do something else. Do those things that have the most value. We could spend an entire morning talking about nothing about work in progress. The Cliff Notes short version of that is, anything that is in progress has not delivered value. The shorter the time that something is in process before delivery, the greater the value. That's the key. If you wanted to learn what lean is in a nutshell, it's not having stuff that's sitting there and not generating value, it's generated cost. Get as much done as fast as possible. We've got to know when done is done. Do we have a common agreement? How many people start a project and everyone has agreed to and knows exactly when it will be done and what success looks like? Got a few tentative hands because we want to raise our hand. But a lot of times it's just not definitive. It's not wiggle-proof. In Good to Great by Jim Collins, he called them big, hairy, audacious goals. Things that were stretch goals, but so specific, the team couldn't say, well, we made this better. Well, okay, what's better mean? No, we increased system performance, we increased claims processing by 82%. That's our goal. I can't wiggle out of that. I can't cheat the numbers. And then last, we're delivering, by breaking it up, we're delivering value quicker. Now, if I'm for a management team, or leaders, or what you should expect from your management team, we have to have self-managing teams. We have to let people work the way they work best, or the system doesn't get its full efficiency. That's kind of why we hate micromanagers. It's not that we just hate being told what to do. It's they're telling us how to do it the way they would want it done, or they would do it themselves. That's not playing to our superpowers. That's not playing to what we do best. So we need to change, we need to flip the script and enable self-managing team. Actively, throughout all our businesses, we need to have common definitions of what done is. Everything, think about in all of your meetings, if you think about what do these skateboard, the scooter, and the bicycle look like, why not create a quality matrix that says we're going to evaluate at each step across these 7 characteristics, and here's our point system, and if it doesn't get 42 points, it doesn't move forward. Create ways of saying there's no wiggle room. If it does not score, we need to go back and change something until it scores enough. It's kind of like, I'm not going to get political, but when we look at elections, why don't we have a process that says to pass something new, 75% have to approve it? Because do we really want to approve a change that 25% of people hate? And could we really live with something that has that much? What if right now, half of us hate something, the other half love it? We always have half of the country that's ticked off. Why are we doing the same things in our companies? Where we're creating situations where one group is always going to be mad at us. Okay, so what does this look like in our project cycle? So we typically look at a project cycle, we've got the normal loop. We do annual planning, we initiate our projects, we manage those projects, we implement them, and then we rinse and repeat on an annual, or some of us have even gone to a quarterly basis now for that. Ooh, helpful, not quite there yet. So what does this mean we're doing? Do we have any project managers in the room? You're going to hate this next one. That means that project managers have been taught, have been indoctrinated, most of them, that they need to manage scope, resources, and time. In essence, what that means is they are managing tasks, schedules, and blame. They know what needs to get done, in what order, who's doing it, and who to yell at when they don't get it done. That is building in a hostile relationship from the beginning. Instead, if we look at it as a facilitation, as servant leadership flips that script, and I will take the worst servant leader over the best task, schedule, and blame manager every day of the week. So what is a servant leader? So first off, instead of looking at this as managing, you look at it as a facilitator. This is also what the role of the Scrum Master is kind of designed to be. What does the team need to be successful? What will set them up? The schedule is not to define what has to be done in what order. It's to give everyone a common view of what has to be done so that we can collectively be successful. It's a tool to use. It's no better or different than email or conversations or office products. Any of these are just tools to make our team successful. But if you see yourself as a facilitator towards team success, somebody that's an enabler, somebody that clears roadblocks, somebody that runs interference so that the helicopter leaders don't swoop in and ruin our projects by jumping in and making crazy statements that throw us into chaos for days. They ask themselves continually, what do I need to do to be successful? What do our teams need? What do we all need? And all of us can do this principle. All of us are leaders, and can be leaders, because a leader is a person who does what's right, despite what maybe is the easy thing to do. To quote the great Albus Dumbledore, there comes a time in our life when we must choose between what is right and what is easy. When you pick what is right, you are becoming a servant leader. You are making yourself, your organization, and your team stronger because you're willing to step out of that comfort zone. And then looking for obstacles, constantly looking for all those blockers. When I was managing a team, one of the big blockers was getting a laptop. So if your laptop went down, you're gone for a week. So I procured 2 extra laptops and issued those every time we brought on a new person, and then used their hiring to backfill my stock. So I always had 2 spare laptops. If someone forgot one, they needed updates, something happened. And so we had almost zero downtime when it came to that. So if you hear somebody saying, especially a PM or a stakeholder manager, I'm the one who's responsible for doing this. I'm the stakeholder. I'm the one who ultimately is my success or failure. They are being a dictator. They're not being a servant leader. When you see somebody who's making statements like, I'm supporting the team so that we can all achieve the goal. The focus is on the team's success. You're seeing servant leadership in action. I have found that people who proclaim themselves loudly as servant leaders often don't understand what it means, and they don't do it well. So if you see somebody, if you're interviewing for a promotion in your company or switching jobs, and someone says, well, we firmly believe in servant leadership here, and here's how I tell my team to be servant leaders, run away quickly. All right, so 3 cornerstones to being a servant leader. Number 1, you've got to empower your team. This means to trust them to make decisions, to trust them to take action, to support them. You can challenge it, you can discuss it. Look up delegation poker if you want to see different ways of influencing teams and making decisions. All of them are appropriate at different times. You've got to support the team, clearing obstacles, helping them, getting them what they need to be successful. And the last, instead of listening to respond, we need to start listening to understand. And this one is hard because we're always right and we know what's best and we know what we meant. What we've got to realize is what we meant and what we said isn't what was heard. And the reverse is happening too. So try to listen to understand whenever you can. All right, so another way that this whole thing breaks down is because we're managing tasks. We estimate, we schedule, we link the tasks, we monitor, and update. So this is just wrought with failure. Because we're talking about tasks, we're not talking about delivering value. Instead, if anyone is involved or wants to know probably the best book in org change management and getting things done, Switch by Dan and Chip E. They basically say, get the team on a destination postcard. What is that car going to look like? How will we know we have a car at the end? And what are the critical steps we need to script to be successful to get there? If the team is constantly understands what that goal is, they will constantly realign towards that goal. Where we build something that doesn't match is when we aren't aligned to the same goal, and our individual teams are not collectively successful. And I apologize for the speed of this. There's a lot of stuff in 45 minutes. So, Cynefin Network. One of the hardest things, if you're not very good at grammar, to pronounce, but that is pronounced Cynefin. 4 quadrants. The first one, best practices. This is our ideal operating area. This is where everything we deal with is known knowns. When we talk about our operations, we know what we need to do, we know how to do it, we know how we're going to respond. So really, all we do is we sense what happens, we categorize it, and then we pick whatever response we're supposed to do. This is our ideal follow the process. Is iterative going to really help us here? Is this a good place for iterative or high agility? Not really. Like, being more responsive, sure, but you're not making changes. You're just following the process because you already know what you know. But then I get into a good practice. These are the complicated areas where I have known unknowns. This is usually our projects. When we start a project, we generally know what it is we don't know, and we go out and start learning about it to deliver that project. Because very rarely are we making a change where we have known knowns. Usually we're just defining unknowns. So we've got to sense, we've got to analyze, and then decide how to respond. So iterative helps here, because if I can break that cycle of defining those unknowns, I reduce the risk, I deliver value. So this is a good place. Where iterative and agility really becomes the king is in emergent areas. Emergent areas is when I have unknown unknowns. These could be new market threats. If I was a cab company, my unknown emergent would be when Uber and Lyft started proving out that they were successful. How am I going to respond? What am I going to do? This is a perfect place to use iterative because we really don't know what we don't know. Our goal is to try and go clockwise. We want to turn the emergent into good practices, the good practices into the best. The last area is chaos. This is high disruption, complete chaos, complete disruption, don't know what to do. So here, all we're going to do is react as fast as we can. This is when the building is on fire, figuratively and literally, and we just want to try and move it to emergent, so eventually we can get it over to complicated. So unfortunately, what I want to do is quickly, because we just hit the end of time, I want 2 people to share something that they took away that they think they might be able to apply personally or professionally. Yes? Yes?
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks. I realized that the agility that we have in our dev team does not apply to the project team. So the definition of done, we have one for the devs, we don't have one for the project team. So getting our support team and our sales team to embrace the iterative pieces we put together is something I would address.
Absolutely, great. So you've got a dev team that's very agile and very flexible, but the overall project and delivery team isn't. You have teams aligning to different goals and different structures. That has to come in. One more? Go ahead.
Me?
Yes.
That last model that you did, I'm going to make a visual of it. I'm going to have the team discussion around where they think they are.
Excellent.
And talk about how to rotate and get from there.
Fantastic. There's I've got a link to Wikipedia, and there's some great TED Talks on this as well from the sponsor. So I don't want to run over and get blasted out in the reviews. Please, throughout the conference, how you rate these sessions absolutely defines on what speakers, what topics, what happens next year. So if you've been in less than ideal topics or seen things, that feedback comes back so that when you come back next year, it will be an even better event. I will clean up so I can talk while I'm doing that, and then I'll move out if anyone has any different questions. So the prizes on the front row, because participation and standing up is rewarded, are cell phone stands. It flips open to hold a cell phone or tablet, and it has a screen cleaner on the inside. So anyone that's sat up front got a prize. Think about that the next time you come to an event. Thank you, everyone.